The way to think about the brain in terms of brain function that we're going to look at in a moment, the parameter theta unity, is you can think of the brain as a two-story house. The first floor gets built very quickly. That is the subcortex, the limbic system, including the thalamus. That primitive system, the hippocampus, the hypothalamus, those things get developed, mature early. They get wired early and in development. And so they control the child, the toddler, for a number of years. And the one thing about when the first floor, the limbic system, or the subcortex is in charge, it's the sort of the reptile part of our brain, which is in charge. Well, the reptile doesn't have any goal-directed thought. It doesn't. It doesn't. Its goals are very direct. It's like stimulus control goals. So there's something to eat, go after it, kind of thing. It doesn't know, okay, next Tuesday I'm going to do this. It doesn't have goal-directed action. That it's not, long-term goal. And the best way to think about the subcortical thought is that everything's relational. You have relational thinking. And relational thinking means everything's about me. I'm the center of the cosmos, so everything's about me. Anything that happens in the environment, it's about me. And that is how we all start off as children. And we can see this in language development in babies and toddlers. They start out relational. And after a while, they start integrating the neocortex in the second floor. The second floor has like 10 times more room, 10 times more cells to represent what's going on in the world. So it starts realizing, goes from relational thinking to what's called object thinking, where objects now independent of you. So not that everything's about you, things can be independent. And it's interesting to always watch where, like, for instance, just last night I was walking inside and there was a dog queuing on me. When I was heading to the elevator, he was in that relational thinking mode. He kept looking at me thinking, I'm acting because of him. What I'm doing is related to him. Of course, it's not. I'm independent. I'm just going up to my apartment. I'm taking the elevator up. But he couldn't keep his eyes off me. He kept thinking somehow I'm going to respond and relate to him. Of course, it was not. And that's the same thing as like if a dog's in the car and hears a horn go off, may start barking, thinking the horn honks are about them. It's not. They're relational thinkers. That's what we want to stop in humans or minimize in humans and people, because it's unhealthy to be constantly relational. We want to go. There's a spectrum of relational thinking to this object thinking or independent thinking, and we want to find a balance point. Closer probably to the independent side, because that's where the neocortex is dominating our thought. With goal-directed thought is controlling us, not letting the environment control us. It's all about not letting the environment control us. So the good news is we can see in 55 brain areas, 19 brain regions in this map. It's called Kaiser Neuromap software. We can see how much a brain region is letting the bottom floor control the individual versus the top floor. The neocortex versus the subcortex. And it's in this measure called theta unity. It's just, now when you look at this measure down here, this is actually transparency that we were looking at in essence. How similar is the activity in all directions for a brain region? And if it's orange in the measure we're coming up, that means it's hyper similar. And that is an indication that the neocortex is letting the subcortex through. It's not repurposing it. There's not enough gray matter or white matter or both to alter the first floors, the subcortex, a response to what's happening in the environment. So we want to go from this transparency to a balance point. We actually have this opaqueness that happens when the neocortex is like too much in charge, too involved, and we want to find a balance point is the screen. That's the healthy balance point. And we're going to be doing it for Brodmann regions and for Brodmann areas. All right, there's many years has been out there, Brodmann Atlas I created, talking about the areas of the brain. And each brain area we found, and also looking at the scientific literature, what issues are associated with those areas, as I'll show you. We're going to skip over. We'll come back to that some other time. Okay, so the interesting thing we see with this kid, age 16, he shows his transparency in the cingulates and the occipitals and a little bit in orbitals in the temporal lobe. 3 years later, because there's been no neurotherapy, he's very similar. And you see the blue in the dorsolateral. Now, the sad thing is, this we did not know at the time, He recorded this in February 2010. Later that year, I would figure out that is actually a marker for depression, anxiety, and even psychotic risk. It's a psychotic risk marker. That's really, I didn't know. We didn't know at the time. We didn't know to change it. So we know how to remove that. We would do what's called FCPZ COMOD down to what's called breaking the singlets. We'd have to improve the singlets because right now the singlets are in charge. And that means kind of his 5-year-old mind is in charge still. He still thinks he's got the only perspective that matters. So you think of it like orange means you're too certain of your perspective. And that means you're going to be depressed and anxious because the world has all this independence around it. We all belong in a tribe of 150 people, a group of 150 people. The world around us has a multiplicity of perspectives. We're not the only perspective. In fact, we won't get rewarded much if we're the only perspective because we don't know how to reward ourselves as much as we think we do. And so when you let the world in more, you'll be more rewarded. The problem with people here, and it's why it's also a sign of depression, is often there'll be opportunity, we'll knock at their door and they won't answer because they'll say no to it because they don't fully agree in how to do it. Someone says, let's go out and go to this new place. And like, no, I don't want to do that. Someone in an orange singlet, no, that won't be fun. But someone who didn't know orange might go there and have a great time. Orange singlets lead to depression, anxiety, and can even be a marker of psychotic risk. In fact, they have a couple of schizophrenics. They do have that marker, especially when it's full-blown schizophrenia is going on. Okay, so, I don't have the marker. Oh, I don't know why I'm jumping that one. Let's do this one first. Okay, so unfortunately, recorded, the first one was 3 years before, 2007, and this one was February 2010. And along comes these papers talking about psychotic risk, where you have this hypercoupling going on in the middle of the brain. And I start getting these data by 2012. We have, it was 2010, and then it took a couple of years of analyzing, and we have these death row inmates, and a lot of the murderer rapists show this same marker this kid has. Now, to sort of cut to the chase, this kid would actually be arrested the very next day. So his parents who brought him in, it was too late to do anything. The crisis was on him. That was, you want to catch him before then, or you catch him after, as they're going through rehabilitation. But it's a little too late to get neurofear back going because he was very aggressive. Like I said, when he walked in the doors, he was raw. I was just very nervous, like having a wild animal in the house. Well, he had this marker. I used to call it my rapist marker, these yellow orange singlets, because it was all rapists all had them. Where I had some murderers who don't have them from the databases we collected. But then eventually a psychotic showed up, someone who purely wasn't a murderer, wasn't a rapist, just a psychotic, had the marker. And I go, oh, it's psychotic risk. And that's when this paper came out about the same time. So then I realized, oh, okay, it's psychotic risk factor. And you will see it in people who are depressed and severely depressed, especially, and anxious. And the good news is within about 8 sessions, we can break this, meaning we can get rid of it. We can normalize it very easily to fix. Okay, so what should have been this one here, then we go to the back of the head to see, now this is 19 regions. And he had this orange PCC. Now it changed from the left to the right side. It's the right side first, and over here it's on the left side. It's actually a marker of, it can be trauma marker, and it's usually a marker, it can be a marker of someone who's susceptible to addiction, which he was. It's an addiction marker and PTSD marker. And here's some data that shows, and I knew this at this time. So when he came in and he had that marker, I said, okay, we got an addiction PTSD marker going on here. Because in 2007, we were talking about this is how posterior cingulate, when you have PTSD, post-traumatic stress disorder, retracts its coordination with the other parts of what's called default network. This is how normal brain is coordinated with these other parts of the default network, and it's not less coordinated. And this is how you can see it in this EEG measure. And here's some examples: someone who has PTSD, someone who's equivalent to worse than PTSD, abandoned child, someone who's very depressed. I like to call that area the maternal hub, that where you don't get nurtured. You don't feel your self-nurturing is down. That's why you go seek substances or behaviors that are addictive to make you feel better. Okay. All right, middle of the head, those areas. Okay, he had these markers here. Now, area 6s, they did change from left to right. Left hemisphere typically deals with familiar situations, the right more novel. Area 5, in sixes we have found to be what's called personal boundaries and social boundaries. I want to go into that longer in another video, but just to show you people who have fives and sixes can be violent and aggressive. We have markers of that, so we don't want. And he was, like I said, he got arrested next day, or actually maybe it was that evening. I think it was that evening he got arrested. And then we go in front of him, and he had the ACC's yellow, which is very unusual to see in adults. That ACC's, the anterior cingulate cortex, is where you monitor consequences of your actions, and it usually matures pretty quickly because most people, to be a fit into society, have to behave in ways that they won't do actions that will be egregious, that will have bad consequences. Well, when you're yellow, it's people who aren't really good planners. They're not really worried about the consequences. They don't mind lying to you, even though you can tell they'll ruin the relationship because the lies will be obvious or be verified as lies very quickly. Well, he had that. He had some other things too. You can see the similarity. Again, this shows you how similar over 3 years with no intervention. Some of these ones look very similar. And just to give us 2 examples, here's someone who killed a cop and hung himself with those ACCs. Another one lit a person on fire. I usually see young girls, 14-year-olds who like to lie to us. Will always have that orange, the yellow ACCs. Okay, so we do what's called defoliatory training. We work the areas. We can improve these, the functioning, move things towards the green, as I'll explain in other videos. And we use what's called the 10-10 electrode positions to go after the various areas that need training. And we get training, we get this training recommendations, and we've been doing this now, and we're approaching 2,000 individuals who've been trained. So empirically, we've learned what to do and how to improve, how to clear the problems from the habits, so the person's not letting their reptile control them. They're not overreacting to the environment. All right, that is a brief review of this brain map from Kaiser Neuromap Institute.